Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Energy UK's Mission Possible podcast series. I'm Iman Sadiq. I am the chair of the Young Energy Professionals Forum and also policy manager at Smart DCC. So throughout this series, we will be touching upon priority areas that the government must urgently address in order to deliver on their manifesto commitments around energy, but also related sectors such as transport. And these priorities are all explained further in Energy UK's Mission Possible report, so please do check that out. I think we can drop a link in the chat. But today's episode will focus on affordable energy bills and a sustainable retail market. So joining me for this are 4 energy industry experts. We've got Natasha, Dan and Daisy in the room, and also Louise is joining us online. So please can I get you all to just briefly introduce yourselves. Let's go with Louise first, and then we can go clockwise in the room.
Chief Customer Contact Officer at ETL 20, so I look after a range of things.
Wonderful. And Natasha.
Hi, I'm Natasha Hobder. I'm one of the Deputy Directors at Energy.
Yep, I'm Dan Outchin. I'm the Head of Policy and Regulation for the Customs Business at EDF.
I'm Daisy, and I head up the future retail market element of the customers team, Energy UK.
Brilliant, thank you all. So to set the scene very briefly, as I mentioned, the government committed to reducing energy bills in their party manifesto, Labour's plan for change. But as we know, post-gas crisis, with the ongoing invasion of Ukraine and a number of other factors, energy bills still remain high and our markets remain volatile. The bills might even increase as you come into this winter, which we'll touch on in a little bit more detail. But yes, so this impacts all energy bills and consumers, but we also know that it disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable households. So in today's episodes with our industry experts, we'll be discussing steps that we think the government can take in order to address this. So before we begin, very briefly, just to everyone joining online, as we go along, please do feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. You might not see them posted once you've pressed entered, but we would have received them, rest assured, and we'll come to them at the end. So as the authors of the Mission Possible report, I think we'd go to Energy UK first. So Natasha, do you mind giving us a brief overview of what we mean by affordability to begin with, and why it's important now, what's its impact in the broader energy system and markets?
Sure. Well, I think we can all remember when inflation started ticking up, and that really was a result of energy bills ticking up and the wholesale volatility that we were all experiencing due to events. There's no need to go into those. But that really did highlight that energy is a critical bill for most households, that where that goes up, it has a profound impact not only on general inflation, but on the ability of each household to pay that bill and other bills. That has a wider impact on each household, which is it reduces that household resilience, it increases that household's debt, and overall it reduces the amount of spending power and saving power for each household. This is in sort of average terms, on a per household basis. What we can see is people making really profoundly difficult decisions between buying food or heating their homes. And that kind of heat or eat decision gets harder and harder the higher your energy debt is. So coming out of the crisis, we can see inflation slowly reducing and energy prices reducing, but they're still tracking higher than they were before the crisis. As you said, they're ticking up through the price cap, and they're likely to stay at that elevated level for at least a number of further quarters. And that means that some of the lag factors, for want of a better phrase, that we experienced post-crisis are really coming into play. So per household debt is ticking up. On a macro level, it's over 3 billion, which is a huge sum of money, and that's only going up. We're having sort of per household debt sitting between £1,500 per fuel. Again, that's a kind of average. Not every household experiences that, but that means some households experience much more than that. That causes profound anxiety, but also has impacts on health. So for all of those reasons, the energy bill and the ability for households to afford it is one of the key issues of our time.
Yeah. Exactly. Thanks, Natasha. And then likewise, Daisy, we mentioned the word sustainability, which is of course, and sustainable, which is of course, we say that throughout the energy sector and environment sectors, but what do we mean when we talk about sustainable retail market in particular? And the same questions, why is that important right now? What's its impact to the broader energy system?
Yeah, so we I suppose what we want from the energy market is to provide plentiful, cheap and green electricity and also gas. And in order to do that, a lot of things have to happen. So we have got, as Natasha says, sort of a political environment where gas is quite volatile. We also need to deliver net zero, and we also need to keep the lights on. So it's a familiar challenge that suppliers are facing. The world's changing, so we're competing with a lot of other countries to deliver those same things. And the supplier plays a really important role as the hub of the customer engagement. So customers deal with their energy supplier for lots of things. That role might change in the future. So we've got things coming in which that will make the incentive stronger on customers to shift their usage. And that's going to be really important as we decarbonise. So at the moment, there are already lots of products and services out there which encourage customers to do it, but we need a lot more of it to get people to shift their usage to off-peak and to be rewarded for that.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, as Daisy kind of mentioned, cost and decarbonisation go hand in hand, which seems really simple for us to say, but that's clearly not as much of a reality as it should be yet. And then heading over to the suppliers then, Dan and Louise is joining online. How are affordability issues affecting your duties as a supplier? How have things changed over time, like your plans, etc.? If we take, Louise, if you don't mind answering first, and then we'll head to Dan in the room.
Absolutely. I mean, through the crisis, we've seen a huge increase in contacts. Our contacts went up 206% on our lines relating to additional support credits. So where customers are really struggling and needing that bit of extra help, to the tune of £60 million last year provided to prepaid customers who were struggling. And to the earlier point, having to make that choice between heating and eating, it really drives up the contacts into the call centres. And I think what we need to look at is things like the PSR. Is it still fit for purpose? Does it still do what we need it to do? Because 45% of our customer base are now on the PSR. The likes of Boris Johnson would be on the PSR for having a child under 5. It was originally set up to make sure the most vulnerable were looked after in the case of a crisis, in the case of having a reliance on electricity for medical equipment. What we need to make sure we're doing is making sure consumers are engaging with suppliers, because I think there's been a real downturn, certainly to some extent by the way we're portrayed in the media. We need consumers to speak to us. Vulnerability is in its very nature transient. But if they're really struggling, the early engagement piece is key. And I think we need the media to support that as opposed to just portraying us as bad guys. Because things like smart meters and their role in debt management are huge. And prepay is a payment method of choice for a lot of customers. What it doesn't do is give you necessarily those protections unless the customers can get through to you. So I think there's a lot of changes that have happened as suppliers in terms of the way we work. It's much more of a customer focus. Much as we're painted as kind of the bad guys, I think there's a lot we can do in bringing customers on the net zero journey, making sure no one's left behind. Obviously, we've got the government's commitments in relation to that in offshore wind generation, but actually what can we do to make that available to everyone and not just those able to pay?
Brilliant, thank you, Louise. And then likewise, Dan, what are the changes that you have had to roll out and how they changed over time as well?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot in terms of what Louise has said, and also reflect on some of Natasha's pieces that we've certainly seen increases in contacts, we've seen increases in debt, both in terms of the volume, so the amount of debt customers are struggling with, but also the number of customers in debt, and that growing trend we've seen going all the way back to COVID, of it being customers that potentially haven't been in debt before, or in the old world, pre-COVID, you wouldn't have necessarily assumed they may have faced those challenges before. So we've definitely had that to adjust to. Additional support has been made available. We made around 40 million additional support available last winter to help customers that were in need. And I think, to just touch on the point Natasha made earlier, there's a compounding effect to this as well. It's not just this winter we need to be thinking about. We need to be thinking about what have been the impacts on households for what will be 3 winters of really struggling, and what resources do households actually have left to fall back on. That certainly made last winter more challenging than potentially the winter before, and it's going to be an even bigger challenge this winter. Just to pick up on Louise's point about the PSR as well, I think it's really important we think about what support we have available, what it was introduced to provide, and the situation it was seeking to address. If we go back to this crisis, we can't forget we still had millions of households in fuel poverty before bills even got to the levels they are now or where they may go this winter. And we know that the support that was available then wasn't sufficient to address that challenge. It's definitely not sufficient to address the challenge today.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. And just for those joining online as well, when we say PSR, we mean the Priority Services Register, which is a really useful tool, but as with everything, evolution is normally a good thing. So yeah, Dan touched a bit on the kind of short-term measures, like the upfront support, and yeah, once again, the Energy UK report really details very well the short-term and long-term measures that can be taken to tackle the current scenario. And that heads into our next questions, which I'll open up to all speakers. But let's, again, perhaps begin with the suppliers first. It would be interesting to get your perspective to begin with. What do you think the future should look like, and what can be done in terms of policy and regulation, or really any other factors as well, interventions, to deliver more affordable energy bills and a sustainable retail market? Let's go with Dan and then Louise.
So I think when we look at it, we want to see a retail market where energy is affordable, net zero is made easy for all customers to achieve, and that customers get the services that they need and that they want. And I think key to that at the moment is the challenge of affordability that we touched on earlier. As I said before, the support we had pre-crisis wasn't sufficient. It's not sufficient to the need of what we have today. And I think there is a real need to start thinking about how we can make additional price support available for those customers that are most in need. That can be, how do we build on the warm home discount? It could be, how do we take the lessons we have from schemes like the EPG, so the energy price guarantee that was introduced by the government to help with the worst of the crisis. How can we build on those things, and how can we make sure we have that level of support available for customers that are in need? The key to that is data matching. I'm sure we'll come on to it. One of the big success stories of warm home discount over the last decade has been the successful data match that sits behind its core group, and it's shown what can be done, where industry and government work together to make sure they identify and get support to those that most need it. It's a question of how can we build on these steps and actually make sure we're addressing the challenges in front of us.
I think also the data is going to improve over time. So more and more people are getting smart meters, for instance. More and more people are opting in to sort of time of use tariffs. So that data will improve. There's more you'll be able to do with that data in future, but it's already been used for things like improving the network, like stability, that kind of thing. So that's all very positive as well.
Amazing. Natasha?
I think the data point is really critical, and I also think, as Dan said, we learned some really interesting lessons on warm home discount for data matching, but warm home discount was structured when there was a direct link between need and a set of defined benefits. There's varying definitions between the different countries in the Union, but broadly speaking, it's sort of a benefit-related plus sort of need construct. I guess on targeted support, some of what we learnt through COVID and the subsequent energy crisis was actually it's a much more challenging task to work out who needs help. So warm home discount, data matching, great lesson. It's also the same amount of money given to everybody. And I guess the question then is, targeted help, does it have to be the same amount given to everybody? Are there categories of need? So for example, high medical use, households with sort of large numbers of participants with specific needs, could that be different? And again, there's lots of different models out there, but I think that kind of universal benefits related is the first challenge that I would raise on whether or not this is the best construct we can do. When we looked at it, and I'm sorry I'm jumping in a little bit across Louise, but when we looked at the kind of how we could come up with a kind of support mechanism for the coming winter, we did what we often do, which is in the time available, let's look at what we've got. And there's lots of merits in that. But ideally, as David and Dan were saying, what we really want is something that's based on a much more granular appreciation of who needs help, the type of help, and how we can better direct it. So almost start again, but having learnt the lessons of the help schemes that we've brought to bear so far.
Yeah, brilliant. So it's almost like a pseudo question of equality versus equity in my mind, in the sense of, do you want to give everyone the same thing, the same amount, if that's what we're talking about, amounts and costs, or like look at people's individual needs and what will bring them up to the same level
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. So if we look at the energy price guarantee, for example, there was a sort of fixed level that everyone got. Obviously that varied per need in terms of what you actually ended up paying, but that actually covered people on the price cap, but it also covered fixed tariffs. So if you'd been active in the market and you'd fixed at X rate, you could retain some of that saving, but also, you did get some help depending on, where your rate was structured and when you fixed. So, and I think that element really showed what you could do in terms of same proposal, same approach, but it actually featured differently with sort of different tariff constructs. Yeah. I think it's really about need and targeting and getting as much bang for your buck, whoever pays for it, whether it's bill funded or taxpayer funded, as we possibly can.
Might be one interesting one to ask suppliers is, so the support schemes, they were automatically stuck on our bills, so we didn't have to engage at all. And I think a lot of the success, the future success of affordability and sustainability rests on customers engaging with their energy supply. So we know some are more engaged than others. It's the ones who are, we think, typically not as engaged in their energy supply that might need the support the most. Yeah. And might need energy efficiency measures the most, might need help with engaging with their landlord, that kind of thing. So it's a massive question for the industry of how we improve engagement, how people can find out about these benefits that they can get.
Okay, so brilliant, Louise. That's a good segue into for you to answer this question. So related to what Daisy said, how can suppliers improve engagement, etc., and also that original question, what do you think the future should look like in terms of policy and regulation to deliver more affordable energy bills and a sustainable retail market?
Yeah, big question. I think you're right in relation to it being around engagement. There's a perception that prepaid customers are disengaged. Prepaid customers are 17 times more likely to speak to their supplier than a credit customer. We speak to lots and lots of customers every week. We do around 120,000 calls. Across a customer base, it's only 800,000. I think if you look at the equity type piece in terms of what people get, the way I explain fairness to my 6-year-old is it's not about everyone getting what they want, it's everyone getting what they need. And we have a huge amount of data through smart metering that helps you identify self-disconnection, self-rationing, fully supportive of more help. If you look at the energy bill support scheme, that halved self-disconnections in prepaid customers, which is huge, especially through that winter period and where they were struggling. But there'll be a huge number of customers that also got support when they didn't, which adds unnecessary cost of bills. I think we need something similar to that, maybe as an extension to the warm home discount scheme, but not solely benefits related, because there will be a lot of customers, and the latest CAB figures suggest 50% of everyone they're helping at the minute is in a deficit budget, which is terrifying. And around 40% of people, they say, haven't been in that situation before. I think what gets forgotten is the people that, I think it was Dan's point earlier, who haven't struggled before, who are now struggling and therefore don't know where to turn. I think there's a huge benefit to smart metering data. Obviously, we're 93% smart installed. It means we can get support to customers very quickly. Also means we can identify self-disconnection, self-rationing. But all that information from the DCC is available effectively across industry through other user data. So there's a lot I think the government could use to better target things like the eco schemes to make sure customers are getting the support, both in relation to net zero and lowering energy bills, because otherwise we find ourselves in an odd position whereby social housing has to be at a certain EPC to be let, but that then excludes it from the support. And customers in social housing and private rented have additional barriers to the installation of smart tech and energy efficiency measures. So I think there's lots of really good opportunities going forward. We've got wind, we've got solar. We're looking at restoring some form of stability to the energy market. But it is around rebuilding that trust with consumers, getting them to talk to their suppliers, to understand what can be done, what help is already available, and the additional support we can do. But this isn't something suppliers will fix on their own. This is an affordability crisis now, and we cannot end up in a position where it's social welfare via stealth in the provision of suppliers. We obviously want to help our customers, but I think this is a much wider issue. If they are struggling with their energy bills, that will not be the only bill they are struggling with. And this needs to be a much wider package of support.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. So yeah, Louise mentioned, touched on, that this isn't a problem that suppliers can solve on their own. And we've mentioned data quite a bit, Dan, data matching. Just so we can break this down for the audience as well, what kind of data sets are we talking about that would be useful in identifying vulnerable consumers? Louise mentioned self-disconnection and self-rationing, but how else do you identify these consumers essentially?
Consumption's a really interesting data point in the sense that it is a very interesting data point. It certainly helps with things like self-disconnection and self-rationing. On its own, it isn't necessarily the greatest proxy for need, right? You have some households that are very much in need that consume very little, and you've got households that consume very little and are not in need, and you have the same on the other end. There's not a direct correlation there. So you need to be able to supplement that data with additional data about the circumstances of the household and the needs of the people within it. And I think that's where, the PSR data we already have is part of the answer to that, part of the PSR data held by other industries. So the work that industries are really doing to share data between energy and water is really positive. But it's how do we go a step beyond that? How can we start to think about how we can leverage the data, say, government holds, not just in DWP, which we use for warm home discount, but how can we think about the data that is held within the National Health Service, that's held by HMRC? That's a whole wealth of data. What about what local authorities hold? Local authorities know an awful lot about their residents. How can we unlock the barriers, real or perceived, to that data being used to better target support and identify those people that need it?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Dan. And Natasha and Daisy, same question. Anything you've heard from Energy UK's members and the kind of data that's useful? I was thinking, just as Dan said, that on other data sets that are useful, digital EPC would also be very useful as another energy efficiency to match with what's happening in someone's home in real life as well. But yeah, anything else on what data is useful?
I think there's a really interesting point when we say that benefits data isn't a perfect correlation. There's always an issue with, say, a household doesn't receive benefits, but they're £1 or £2 off that. So you have all these cases where it's very difficult. So to make a judgment or an assumption, you'd need a combination of quantitative and qualitative data. And that's why I think it's quite challenging for suppliers in all cases to make those assumptions, drawing on, even if they could get all of the data, you'd actually have to try and explain in the same way that's going on with large language models now, what are the underlying assumptions as to making those decisions. One of the benefits of warm home discount was you have data matching. You're told who can get the data. So you hold that data as a supplier for the purposes of making those payments and no other. So you could actually share that data around for other defined, very controlled purposes. Or you could say something like health data, for example, where many of us would feel, vulnerable at sharing that data. It doesn't mean you have to share the data. You could just tell suppliers, you could match that data. So if the NHS, although it's challenging for having data across the different trusts and with GPs as well, it's a very disaggregated system, if you like. If we can find a way of data matching where suppliers don't necessarily hold that sensitive data, but can make use of it in defined ways and then are held accountable for that use, I think that's another element to it. But for me, it is trying to work through with everybody who's impacted and their advocates how we would look at some of the standard data points, but then ask ourselves the question, is this enough? Does it cover everybody who might need it? Are there these boundary issues that we might want to work through? And then who is best placed to make those, really challenging decisions? Again, because we'll all be paying for this ourselves, either through bills or through our taxes. So there's that degree of accountability that we also have to work into any matching, sharing and access-based system.
It's also not just a challenge for the energy sector, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If water companies will tell you the same things, telcos will tell you the same things. And I think that was one of the really interesting things about the work that the previous government kicked off earlier this year, looking at single PSR, that DBT was looking at. And I think it's really important that work in a change of government doesn't get lost, because there is a real opportunity here across the economy to actually help us support those people that need it.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And Daisy?
I guess the only thing I'd add is just making sure that customers aren't sort of scared by any of the sort of data privacy concerns that have been flagged in other sectors and areas, and just being really clear that data is being aggregated and is not personalised and is being used very carefully and is being kept very securely. because, you know, we've all sort of done a bit on the smart meter rollout. We know, you know, it's GCHQ sign-off level mechanisms in place to make sure that data is really secure. It's a very positive picture. It's sort of a world-class example of using data. So I think that's an important part, and I think we have heard concerns from customers about data privacy and protection. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's a good question. Who do you trust with your data? I'd say I trust my energy supplier, but there's lots of other actors as well that we need to consider. So I think we'll head over to some audience questions now, and we've got quite a few coming in. So the first one is just something that we've already spoken about a little bit, and a good segue from data as well. What roles do you see smart metering data and market-wide half-hourly assessment data play in delivering affordable bills, sustainable retail market? But I guess the follow-on from that, we've already discussed that a little bit, is what do you see as the key challenges and blockers? This person has asked, what are your thoughts on mandating smart meters to accelerate the rollout?
I mean, that question's come up a fair few times. I think there may come a stage in the programme where the mandation question becomes really, really loud. And I think that's for a variety of reasons, that some customers aren't engaged, others are very frightened. And there's other sort of areas of the country where it's really difficult to install, and, you know, the sort of folklore is really dreadful and putting people off. So for all of those reasons, I think we'll probably get to mandation. I think we'll also get to mandation because what smart meters are part of is a wider smart-enabled system, which has vast benefits. And in order to bring those benefits to everybody, you do need a smart meter. The best example was the flexibility services for the previous 2 winters. One was relatively small scale. Last winter was much bigger scale. These were customers volunteering to sort of constrain their own use when asked for the benefit of that. That was tracked, and the money was accredited through different suppliers, different methods. But smart meters were a prerequisite for that. Same for using your EV as a sort of storage facility, etc. So I think the lockout factor for me is really important element of mandation when we get to it. But it's also to enable everybody, and enable and mandation are somewhat contradictory, but to actually enable everyone to participate in a more fine-grained system, which will help bring costs down for everybody and enable them to participate in the decarbonisation of our energy system.
Yeah,
amazing.
I think with mandation, it's this kind of word that I was trying to avoid because it means different things to different people. So it could mean, so what it doesn't mean, like we'd never sort of say you've got to sort of knock down doors to install a smart meter. But we sort of talk about levers, and so when, say, you're a local council and you're upgrading a block of flats, like why would you put an old-fashioned meter in it? Why don't you just use that opportunity to stick a load of new ones in? You could do it in a really efficient way by having one supplier doing it all. And yeah, I think a lot of the noise around smart has been very focused on a meter, whereas if you think about replacing any other piece of equipment in your home, like you need a new telephone aerial or you need a new broadband router or something, you wouldn't think about what version it was. So I think it's kind of gone that way. Maybe it was industries played a role in it, like trying to over promote it in some circumstances, but like we just talked about all the benefits, it's a digitalization, it's a system-wide upgrade. It's like, it's equivalent to upgrading the railways. It's going to be there forever. It's going to be periodic extra upgrades to it. It's just a thing we've been working through. The customer sees benefits. We're ironing out all the issues that have come up over the years and years that we've been sort of developing it. But it's very hard. It's a very difficult message. It's fundamentally a very complex upgrade. So I think we've struggled in the past to communicate that, maybe.
I think the thing I'd add, obviously, is we've got a framework that sees us through to the end of next year. I think that is a natural inflection point to ask, what is what are we working towards? What is the end point? And what do we need to achieve that? What does that remaining population of households that haven't accepted a smart meter or can't currently have one, what does that look like, and what are the right mechanisms and policies you need to get you to that point? And I think that takes you back to your point, Natasha, of what is the right suite, what is the right framework that actually gets us to the end point where we are achieving the benefits that we know smart can deliver for net zero and for a sustainable market.
Thank you. And then finally, Louise, as well, if there's anything you wanted to add, and particularly from the supplier perspective, of course, you, like Dan, you have that relationship as a supplier with consumers. So what are the key challenges and blockers when it comes to smart metering data? What are your thoughts on mandating as well?
I think it's a really difficult discussion to have. I think a lot of consumers, if they're in debt, will be reticent to speak to suppliers, which means they're likely the ones that are not smart installed unless you've engaged them early. I think, as was noted, the word mandation strikes fear into most people. And there's definitely been a sea change, I think, in the population since COVID in relation to what they will and won't believe, what they feel like they've had forced upon them in relation to, you must have a smart meter, you must have a smart meter. We see a lot of pushback even when meters go out certification. But I think if you look at when we did the digital switchover with televisions, no one considered the fact that, oh, well, I can't keep my analog TV and I'm going to switch over to a digital. There wasn't the same pushback. I think there's a really important role across suppliers, CAB, charities, the government in relation to reiterating the benefits. Certainly with time of use, things like market-wide half-hourly settlement. Although we can already do half-hourly settlement to some extent, it's how much further does that go? Do you then go to 10-second data? What are the population comfortable with before they feel that we're sort of George Orwellian and they're being spied on and we're using this information for nefarious purposes? I think some of that comes down to the reputation of industry. And I think there's a real battle that we've got on our hands in rebuilding that trust before we can see a true full rollout. And I think it would be better to rebuild that trust before we start the mandation conversation, I think.
Yeah, definitely understood. Thank you. Can someone just remind me, so the current go live date for market-wide half-hourly settlement is 2026 summer? Yes, I think that's right, yeah. Okay, perfect. So we spoke a little bit about those kind of short-term measures, and warm homes discount is one of those. So the next question from the audience is, how could the warm home discount scheme be improved to better target those in need and enhance its effectiveness? What are your thoughts on expanding eligibility criteria, for example? We touched on that a little bit in the conversation, but yeah, if there's any further thoughts.
I think Natasha earlier summed it up pretty well, actually. Certainly, that if you can harness better use of data, you can consider how you can most effectively enhance or increase the number of customers eligible. There's obviously a cost element to that. You know, in a world where you've got finite resources, you need to consider how far you can spread those. I think there is that really then important question of, is a flat lump sum across all customers the right way to provide that support? Yep. Or is there a way of actually thinking more creatively about how we can provide that support to people? And as an industry, we've shown we can do many different things. You know, that is the one thing that the support schemes over the last 2 or 3 years have shown. This industry can provide that support and can be quite flexible in how it can do it. Yep. Whether that be on the unit rate, whether it be flat rate, whether it be vouchers. We can do many different things. It's working out what's best for customers, and then I think as an industry we can stand up to that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think the scheme, it's a one-off payment at a period of time, which I think is a really interesting way of helping customers coming into the winter. It's money off bills, but I think there's other ways that you can think about to support customers who are struggling. One could be to do something around debt to actually rebuild some of that household resilience. We could also have a think about, do you want sort of an ongoing targeted scheme where you're discounting from usage costs? You can consider the balance between standing charge and usage charge. Some households will really benefit from that, others won't, so there's some interesting distribution issues. I think one of the key questions around warm home discount is it's bill funded. So if instinctively we might say double, triple, quadruple it, that will really help for people struggling, the bills are high, but actually that means that, that's bill funded. So again, are there other things we can do? Can we think about, say, moving warm home discount as a sort of mechanism off bills onto something else, rebalancing, that's one option, or can we think about retaining warm home discount as it is and building a more discount related scheme? So I think there's lots we can do around sort of one-off ongoing rebalancing within tariff, rebalancing between energy, gas and electricity, for example. And I think the critical thing is to really learn the lessons we learnt from COVID and the energy crisis. And also each supplier would have had their own schemes over the last winter, and they'll have learnt their own lessons in terms of talking to customers. So, as Louise said, that's a lot of contact from their customers on a weekly basis. They will know a lot about their customers. So that knowledge to actually help those customers for Utilita might be different. They might have gleaned different lessons from their customer cohort than another supplier would. So I think there's also those specific insights that can be gleaned on a qualitative level that will really help to direct and sort of do that. And then the last point I'd quite like to make is that I think it's a very undemocratic system, energy. It's very complicated. It's got lots of acronyms. It does feel done to you, especially when your bills go up. I think we could also work on a democratization of energy so that we bring customers in a more real way. And that could include everything from sort of assemblies to ongoing consumer panels, which I know a number of suppliers have, to sort of ongoing discussions, surgeries, all sorts of other ways in which we can learn the lessons for how consumers and citizens would like to get information, input and be heard, so that some of those issues that are really being experienced in their lives actually do manifest in whatever schemes we're able to create and to offer.
I think there's a really important distinction there, isn't there, between taking it back to Natasha's first point about the ongoing challenge of affordability and the situation many households find themselves in after several difficult years. And it may well be that you actually need separate interventions to tackle those two different problems. Because, how do you get people out of a situation? How do you stop them repeating and falling back into it?
Yep. Okay. And David, did you want to comment on that question as well before I?
Nothing extra to add, but just an observation, and we'll have all sort of, 4 of us have worked for an energy supplier or seen snapshots of how they work, and I think there's a lot of creativity. So when you've listened into a few calls, you can see how much customer service agents have to think on their feet, and I don't think I appreciated before the amount of tailoring that there is, and these are energy suppliers, massive organisations. They have a lot of customer service agents, but it's sort of being able to, and it goes back to the data side of things, but also being able to tailor and understand your customers, because they are diverse portfolios that different suppliers have. So Louise and Dan will have completely different types of customers, and will be working very hard to engage with them in the best way.
Yeah, and part of the challenge is also how do you enable and empower your frontline staff to be able to address and interact with customers and actually be able to find solutions to their needs.
Yeah.
And that's something I know we work very hard on. I'm sure the same is also true for Louise.
So that's interesting. We mentioned suppliers having to be creative. Natasha, you mentioned democratising energy. There is a very hard question that's going to come through from the audience, but it's linked, so as good a time as ever to ask it. Apologies in advance. The question, which I've just lost as I said it, is if smart meter data isn't widely available to help across affordability and sustainability, how will industry get the data needed to provide the required support?
I think we hope that it will be. It just requires, we've already got, well over half. We're expecting to get to sort of 70-80% in the next few years. But the data, so the NAO report last year looked into what's already happened with the data. And this isn't so much about affordability, it's more about the network level benefits, but essentially the programme has already broken even on that. So, and as half hourly settlement comes in, as more time of use tariffs come out, as people start to get more EVs or start to electrify their homes and heating. So I guess it's going to happen. I guess the question is how quickly is it going to happen? And obviously, the quicker it happens, the better, because you can get those benefits sooner. Yeah. But I would, so I guess the bottom line is it will happen.
It will happen, yeah. Louise, sorry, I'll come to you online on that one as well. So either any comments on the smart meter rollout and how it's going, what it could lead to, but also that original question, if the energy data isn't available, or at least smart meter data isn't widely available, how will industry get the data needed to provide support required?
Well, I think it is quite widely available. If you look certainly at anything done through the DCC, enrolled and adopted meters, you can become what's called a other user data for that data. So it's not available just to energy suppliers. We are seeing more and more people joining that and using it. I think the issue with this much data is how do you use it in a way that's meaningful? I don't think the accessibility of the data is the issue. I think it's how you then interpret it, what models you're running it through. Data is, you'd think, objective, but in relation to energy, I'd argue that's not the case because there are so many factors that impact it. And going back to Dan's point earlier, you have to treat every customer as an individual. So actually, a change in someone's usage or a spike or a change in the way they're paying for one customer won't look the same, even if the consumption data suggests it is, versus someone else who may live 3 doors down. I think the issue is not the availability of the data. I think the issue is how we use it, how we work across industries. So if you've got things like the warm heat prescription, how do we correlate data from multiple sources to really help us help customers, as opposed to just looking at it in isolation?
Definitely. Yeah, it's like how do we correlate that data and then ensure that whoever that data has been shared to actually has the same interpretation to begin with, and then they can interpret it in different ways, of course, but data interpretation. Data sharing is one thing, and it's one of kind of the first steps to better use of that data in some cases, but then data interpretation is a whole other big thing to tackle. So the next question then from the audience is, looking ahead to future winters, as suppliers in the main energy relationship for households, what is their role in household retrofit, including heat? And second half of that question, what is needed in retail markets to incentivize a more active role for suppliers as the energy experts? Let's go with Dan first, and then Louise, and then Natasha and Daisy as well.
I'm not sure we need any more incentive. I think the incentive and the opportunity is very much there, and I can speak for EDF. We've invested in organisations that provide solar panels and batteries, in organisations that train heat pump installers and install heat pumps. We've been at the forefront of installing energy efficiency measures through schemes like ECO and GBIS since the outset of those schemes many moons ago. So I don't think we need any more incentive. I'm always taken to something I think Adam Storer at the NEA always says, which is there's no way to net zero that doesn't go through customers' homes. Yep. And to the point Daisy made earlier, we provide a current function in this market of being that hub. We are an actual point and an actual place for customers to come to and to talk to about their energy needs and how they can take that decarbonisation journey. And that's the challenge for us of how do we rise to that and how do we provide that opportunity to customers.
And then Louise, the same question. Just to repeat, what is the supplier role in household retrofit, including heat? And if any more incentives are needed for suppliers, what should those be?
I completely understand. I don't think it's about incentivizing us. I think we want to be out there, we want to be doing this, we want to be installing heat pumps or whatever is right for customers. I think the heat pump piece is interesting because that won't work for all customers. What we see in prepaid is a lot of customers just switch their gas off through the summer and that's how they budget. If it's solely doing heat, there's a real education piece you need with then installing a heat pump that's expected to be always on and always running in relation to changing consumption habits. So I think there's a huge role in education. I think what we need to do to really progress this is look at what we're doing with social housing and landlords and the barriers that are put in place for consumers. They may want to have that conversation with us, but what barriers do they have and how can you get past them?
I think that's right, and I think then you're talking about advice, but you're also talking about how do you manage upfront costs. The bus as a scheme is a great scheme in terms of improving sort of uptakes of heat pumps, but it is time limited, and there is a question about what the enduring program is there. And then I think you've also got the question of running costs, and that is a big challenge at the moment. That unfortunately we live in a world where the distribution of costs across electricity, gas bills, and taxations means that the cleanest option, the greenest option, i.e. heat pump, is not necessarily the cheapest option for a customer to run. And at a time when people are struggling with bills, that just creates another barrier for customers making that decision and making that choice to invest in net zero.
Yeah, comes back to what Daisy mentioned at the beginning on the definition of sustainability and Natasha as well, and affordability, cost and decarbonisation go hand in hand for sure. Natasha, did you have anything to add on that point? And Daisy as well on supplier incentives, household retrofits and those kind of roles.
I guess it's just a couple of points to add. One would be in a lot of the survey data that we've seen, certainly that government has run, there's sort of very high recognition of the need to get to net zero and a lot of support. But I think per area, is there enough knowledge for customers to make decisions as and when their decision points hit them? So, for example, are there things going on locally that might mean, X option wouldn't work, Y option would work, or actually there's going to be a publicly funded change in a couple of years. So I think there's a lot of work that could be done at local, regional and national level, which is definitely starting to be looked at. We've got GB Energy, which is sort of participating in, as we understand it, partly sort of participating in local partnerships. We've got government who are recognising the need for those local partnerships and local energy. So I think that level of information availability at all levels would be super helpful. But I also think it's kind of being realistic. It's the fact that if the public is linking an immediate lowering of bills because of renewable generation coming on stream, that may not be accurate in all cases. It's actually a programme. There's a period of time that is needed. Various other inputs are needed. And not that we want to sort of go on about the complexity of the system, but it is quite complicated. So I think it's also about being realistic about expectations and what can be expected by when. And that would also help, I think, households, individuals and businesses take decisions around decarbonisation.
I was going to make the point Natasha made about information and just, if you took, so we're in an energy industry bubble, we hear about all these products and exciting things and schemes that are happening, but if you just sort of woke up one day, it's like, right, I need to reduce my bills, I'm going to do an energy efficiency measure, what do I do? And, there's government websites that have been helpful on that, but is there a one-stop shop? Is there something that people trust that can start that first step? Things like, should I get a heat pump? I live in a thatched cottage, or I have a landlord, and all these questions that you start the process of research and you're confronted by things that seem like quite insurmountable challenges. It's sort of getting to the bottom of those, even if the answer is not right now, but this is what you can work towards to get solar panels or a heat pump useful.
And I think as a supplier, I think we see ourselves as having a role and a function in helping to provide customers a way through that journey and providing a one-stop shop, if you will. But I suppose that doesn't take away the need from the fact that there is always going to be a need for independent advice as well, and independent advice and support to help customers make those decisions.
I guess there's also this thing around kind of matching that information provision to consumers with the right point in the consumer journey, so that it's not at the wrong time and they forget about it. Like with heat pumps and boilers, for instance, if you only think about replacing your boiler when your boiler is broken, then that will be the right point to start to tell them initially that this heat pump journey, you need to do this many measures, and that's when you perhaps need to start incentivizing people on the routes available.
And standards have to be very high as well, because word of mouth is so important. Like we've learned on the smart meter rollout, it has to be of a very, very high standard. It has to be consistent, and customers have to trust it.
Yeah, definitely. Customers have to trust it, definitely. As we've got a little bit of time left, but if you're in the audience, please do feel free to drop a few more questions in the chat. I wanted to just get your final reflection, I guess. So however you want to take this, but maybe like your top priority for the government to tackle sustainable retail market and affordable energy bills. Let's go with Louise, if you don't mind going first. Sorry to put you on the spot. And then, we'll go in the room as well.
Absolutely. I think we need to look at more targeted support for consumers. I don't think an amendment to a unit rate is right if we're really going for net zero, because there's no then price stimulus to reduce energy consumption in line with what might be safe. I think we need to look at rebuilding trust in the energy markets, so that consumers are comfortable coming to us to ask for help for what they can do in relation to energy. We should know this industry best. It's incredibly complicated. We want to be able to help and educate consumers. We can only do that if they come and speak to us. So I think we need to really focus on what energy efficiency measures are right and what do we do in the short term to avert a winter worse than the last two, because consumers' resilience is so far degraded.
Yeah, thank you. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I think debt and affordability are really key issues. I think we have a part to play as the energy industry, but we can't resolve those on our own. I think the impact is really significant on households and will continue to be unless we sort of accept that there's sort of wide macro measures that are going to be needed, and there's also measures in the industry. For example, we talked about targeted help. I think we can usefully look at, as a corollary to that, the costs that are on electricity bills versus gas bills to recover the costs of various policies that we've been talking about. So Dan mentioned some of the schemes for installing energy efficiency measures, but there are others. There are other levies coming on stream. So actually to take a step back and say who needs to cover the cost of what and when, to maintain the incentives to invest and innovate, but also to not have everything coming on the consumer bill at exactly the same time. I think there's lots that we can do as an industry to take a step back from that and make sure that the transition is a fair transition. So I would say debt and affordability are the key issues, but underpinning all of that is as fair a transition as we can manage.
Yeah, definitely. Nice one. Thank you, Natasha. And then Dan, and finally Daisy.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I suppose I think draw on the positives that we've got a supplier model that can deliver all these things that we talked about. We don't think it needs a full, we don't need to rip it up and start again. It's more improving on what we've got and tweaking it. It can make a huge difference. Like we talked about some of the big differences that can be achieved today. And I think it needs to be backed by strong government messaging. And, new government has sort of shown good commitment so far already. But it does need to be also backed by supplier performance. We think a competitive, efficient supplier should be able to make a profit. That's going to be the backbone, and the incentives and the regulatory system needs to support that.
Daisy's kind of stolen my thunder. I was going to say something very, very similar actually. I think what we want.
First.
I know. What we want is we want a retail market where customers get fair value, customers can afford to meet their energy needs. But we also want a market where, to Daisy's point, suppliers and participants in the market can make a fair return, because that fair return is needed if they're going to attract investment, they're going to invest, they're going to innovate, and they're going to deliver the products and services that we're expecting suppliers to help people reach net zero and to help us as a country reach net zero. And I think that's the vision and the goal we should be working towards. In terms of the specific asks for this winter, I think I pretty much agree with everything Natasha said actually, so no need to repeat it.
Thank you all. So I said final question, but then one came in from the audience. So I'll ask this one, and if we can keep it to like literally 30 seconds each, and then we can close. But it's again related. So how can we improve trust in the energy system, and then how can we encourage people to ask for help? So I guess it's a similar theme to what we talked about before. Is this all up to the energy supplier to resolve? How can we encourage people to ask for help?
The trust is they go hand in hand, right? I think. I think on the trust point, there's no magic answer to trust. I think trust in this sector is about delivering exceptional and excellent service and meeting your customers' needs consistently over a long period of time. That's how you build trust. It's the old adage, right? It takes years to build trust, and you can destroy it in a second.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge for us as an industry and us as individual suppliers. In terms of how you encourage that engagement, I think if you can build that trust, you get a natural pull. But a lot of it is about how do you make sure that customers are aware of where that support is, and making sure that where there are gaps in support, you are plugging those gaps, to Daisy's earlier point.
Nice. Daisy?
Yeah, so I agree with Dan that it's performance that's going to drive trust, which will then drive the contact and the engagement. So yeah, it's difficult to know which one you start with, but I think there's already lots of good examples and good practice out there. It's probably about communication.
Yeah, definitely about communication. Natasha, and then finally we'll head to Louise as well. So yeah, trust, and how do we encourage people to ask for help?
It's a really difficult but very important question. I think if you're a customer who has overcome all reticence and fear to reach out, and then you're on a phone line for 4.5 hours, and then somebody can't help you and they pass you on to somebody else, and then they don't remember your name and they get your account details wrong, it's entirely understandable that they don't then trust their supplier. So as Dan said, excellent performance, but it's also about, to put it transactionally, having a reward for your contact. When you contact, you actually get heard and something happens, your account is improved or you're given the help that you need. If you're engaging in the system, so for example, using your car as a sort of battery, you get a benefit from that. If you're constraining your usage, you get a benefit from that flexibility. So there's always that kind of reward and that could be just being heard, which is a low bar in terms of service, or it can be actually being paid back for being an active participant in the market. So I think it's all of those, looking at it transactionally, but also looking at it on a human level. So they're consumers, but they're actually people, and at a basic level, if you don't feel heard, you're not going to trust.
Yeah, definitely. Louise, very quickly, if there's any final thoughts on that questions. And then we'll have to close.
Very difficult one. You can't force trust upon people. Those points, it suggests a level of engagement already. I think the media needs a clear differentiation between generators and suppliers. Much as bad news sells, we need more of the good news stories in terms of what suppliers have done to help, because they do a lot of good. Unfortunately, it doesn't sell quite like all the bad news stories. So we need a bit of balance in the way we're portrayed, I think.
Definitely, amazing. So I think that's all we have time for, but thank you to all our speakers. Clearly a really important and timely priority for government to just get right. As we've discussed, affordable energy bills, sustainable retail markets, important not only for consumers, but the entire energy transition. So before I close, just 2 things to note. Firstly, the next podcast, Mission Possible podcast episode is next Wednesday, so the 21st of August, at the same time as this one, 12 to 1 p.m. And that is titled Mission Zero, Modernising Homes and Businesses. The second thing to note is NGK's annual conference. This is on the 17th of September. It, having been 3 years in a row myself, is a really good opportunity to network and meet with experts from around the industry. It's also just an incredibly well put on event. So yeah, please do scan the QR codes on the screen to register for both of those. Finally, once again, thank you to all of our speakers. So Louise joining online, Natasha, Dan and Daisy in the room, and thank you to everyone who joined the audience.
And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great job.